a guy I've known for a long time and a long-time University of Alabama athletic department employee, and a guy that I knew Tommy Ford had written a lot of books, but until I was prepping for this interview, I guess, Tommy, I didn't, I guess it just didn't hit me how many books you have actually written. I mean, a lot of them. I remember way back when I was working at Channel 40 in Anniston, as we welcome in Tommy Ford to the program. This might have been, was Family Tides your first one?
Well, Gary, thank you. It was. Actually, I did the first part of Alabama's Family Tides in the early 80s, 9 chapters on different families of Alabama football, either fathers, sons, or brothers. And then 10 years later, in conjunction with our 100-year centennial celebration, we did an update. I added 7 more families of Alabama football, and it was reissued under the same name, Alabama's Family Ties. So that sort of started it, and it's just always been a hobby, and I've been blessed to have experienced a lot of great things here, and they just keep on coming. So,
how long have you worked for the university now, Tommy?
Well, this January will be 35 years.
Wow.
And I worked in the alumni office from 1982 to 87. And then when Steve Sloan came in as athletic director, he hired me in May of 87 in the ticket office, and I was ticket manager from 87 to 93, and then director of Tide Pride from 93 to 06. And for the last 10 years, I've been over in the Crimson Tide Foundation. I did the annual fund for a while. I do the A Club, our Letter Winners Association, our Red Elephant Clubs, our booster groups, and various other projects. So it's been quite a ride.
Looking over some of these books that you've written, and we're going to get to the new one, Crimson Mission, in just a moment, but you've co-authored some of these books with the terrific Pat Williams, a man I've interviewed, a longtime NBA executive. You did Bear Bryant on leadership, life lessons from a 6-time national championship coach with him. Bear Bryant on leadership. You've worked with David Housel on the Alabama-Auburn rivalry vault.
Right.
Of course, the book you're probably best known for is the terrific A Season to Remember, Faith in the Midst of the Storm, that you wrote with Carson Tinker following the tornado. Unbelievable read. I know a lot of people have read it. If you haven't, make sure you get A Season to Remember with Tommy Ford and Carson Tinker. But your latest, as we mentioned, is Alabama's Crimson Mission, Coach Saban and the Tide Silence Critics with 16th National Championship. Got a forward by Jake Coker. Of course, Kent Gidley, UA's outstanding athletic photographer, with all the incredible pictures. The motivation to do this book, I mean, you've done a lot of them, but reading it, it seems like you were struck by the fact that despite all the success that Nick Saban and Alabama had become the gold standard for college football, as soon as they lost that home game to Ole Miss, so many people just wrote them off. Was that really the motivation to go ahead and document this season and do that book after the loss to Ole Miss?
Well, obviously the loss to Ole Miss would not have meant anything if we had not won the national championship. The book would not have happened if we had not won the national championship. That's just the way these things work, and I certainly know that. But it followed a similar pattern. After the 11 season, Whitman Publishers approached the athletic department about doing a book on the 2011 national championship after the tornado and all that, and what the team did to sort of win one for the community and for the Alabama nation. So Whitman I had already had experience with in those 2 vault books that I'd done. So I was approved then to be the writer of the 11 book, and then we won it in 12. Mark Mayfield and I co-wrote the 2012 National Championship book. So we were sort of on hold throughout this 15 season, especially November, December. We were in communication with the publisher saying, if we go on to the playoffs, and if we win the first game, and if we win the national championship, we're going to do another book. The athletic department approved it. So we were all kind of on hold, but not until after the Clemson game did that Ole Miss game become such an important part in terms of the book. Now, it did serve as motivation for the team the whole season, and Coach Saban references that several times after we won the national championship, how that Ole Miss game sort of changed the season. And it was obvious that was a critical turning point. And you're right. After that game, so many people did write us off. And I actually quote several of them in the book, the national media. And but our players always said, "Look, we're just focusing on what we do. We don't care about what they say." And that's been Coach Saban's sort of mantra as well. And obviously, it worked out well.
Tommy Ford is our guest, longtime University of Alabama employee and author who has written so many books, including the newest one, Alabama's Crimson Mission. Coach Saban and the Tide silenced critics with 16th national championship. Going back to when you started here as a student in 1974, so you've seen Coach Bryant's amazing run in the 70s. You saw the championship with Coach Stallings, of course, all that Coach Saban has done. And I know they're all satisfying for fans and for the players and for coaches and for people who document the championships the way you have done. But with what had happened in 2013, when Alabama was going for its third consecutive and having it ripped out by the kick six there at Auburn, then 2014 bouncing back, getting into the college football playoff, the favorite to win it all, but getting stung by Ohio State in the semifinals at the Sugar Bowl, and then following that up with another new quarterback after Blake Sims led it in 2014, Jake Coker leads in 2015. In terms of satisfaction, how satisfying? Do you think this is one of the most satisfying national championships out of all of them for Alabama fans and Alabama people, the one in 2015?
Well, I think so, and mainly it's because of the target that we had on our back in 15. We were so close after we'd won it in 11 and 12, so close in 13, made the semifinal game in 14, and obviously made some mistakes, but certainly could have won that game, and I think we would have done to Oregon the same thing Ohio State did. I think all this national exposure has just put a huge target on our backs. So 4 games into the season, we've got an embarrassing loss to Ole Miss at home, didn't play well, had 5 turnovers, and I think that's just when they piled on and shooting arrows and everything at that target. And I just think that was all it took for our team to regroup and get motivated, and they knew what kind of a team they had. They knew what great defense we had, and we had a what would turn out to be the Heisman Trophy candidate, one of the greatest running backs of all time. So it was certainly satisfying, although the Clemson game was probably a little closer and more heart-wrenching than people had wanted or certainly expected.
Tommy Ford, our guest, talking about the new book, Alabama's Crimson Mission. A big part of this book, and a number of the books that you've done on these championships, is Kent Gidley, the University of Alabama's official athletics photographer. When you read the book or go through the book, obviously you're paying attention to what you're writing, but these pictures are just amazing. Of course, he has access that other photographers don't have, but he's an amazing photographer. Talk about working with Kent and how big a part he is of this book with telling stories with his photos. Well,
you're right, Gary. Kent's photos make this book. I will say that. We have about 120 photos throughout the book, full-page color. Everything is just awesome. Of course, Kent has been here a long time. Kent and I worked together years and years and years ago on different projects, and then he was a student here, and we're from the same area. He's from Hopes Bluff. I'm from Gadsden, so we have a lot of ties that way. But Kent's photography and his staff just do amazing jobs. The thing about Kent is, and any of his staff, and that he can go behind the scenes. He can go in the locker room. He can go on the sideline. He can go in team meetings. He can get photos that regular photographers cannot, and we feature some of those in the book. And we have a real poignant moment where the team's praying in the locker room. We have another one where Coach Cochran's giving them a pep talk. So these are the little things, and we picked 120 photos, but we probably had 10,000 to choose from. So they take a lot of photos for every game, and they're really good. And I'm looking at one now, the Georgia game on Derrick Henry's long touchdown run, and look up in the crowd, and raincoats, and everybody's drenched, and it just tells a story. Every picture tells a story, and Kent did a great job with it.
Tommy, you're an Alabama football historian, and as you said, closing in on 35 years as an employee here at the university. You're a student here, written a lot of books. I want to get your take on this Saban era, though, because you watched the Bryant era up close and personal. And, let's be honest, Coach Stallings had a great run, too, but and not to knock any of these former coaches because they were trying. But you go through the DeBose era and the Franchione era and the deal with Price and then Shula, who a lot of people liked but couldn't get him over the top. When Saban came to Alabama, I know that the timing was right. People wanted to win again. This guy had a track record. But having been through Bryant, did you ever imagine that you would see another coach at Alabama do what Nick Saban is doing? Do you think that was something that Alabama fans, I know they wanted to win some games and win a championship or two, but do you think anybody could ever have imagined having one coach like Bryant and then, 30 years later, you get Nick Saban?
No, I think it's just it is really an unbelievable thing. We see Coach Saban a lot locally. We see him on the news, and we see him at practice, and we see him, at games. But in my opinion, like Michael Jordan was one of the elites in basketball, and Jabbar and Magic Johnson, and then you have elites in football, and you have elites in other sports. But and see, Coach Saban is one of those. He is to college football and coaching what Michael Jordan was to NBA basketball. He is the elite of the elite, the top of the top. And Alabama fans have high expectations, but nobody, I think even Coach Mal Moore would have agreed, nobody would have imagined that he could have won 4 national championships in a 7-year period. And the times are different. Coach Bryant was here 25 years and went through so many transitions. His early 60s teams and his early 70s teams were only 10 years apart, but they were worlds apart in the kind of style they played, in the heights and the weights of the players and going to the wishbone. And then he had to deal with all the late 60s changes with, civil rights issues, Vietnam War, the hippie movement, all the drugs coming into the culture, long hair. I mean, all the social things Coach Bryant had to deal with was just really remarkable. On the other hand, Coach Saban has had to deal with a lot less scholarships than Coach Bryant did. So the fact that he's done what he's done and how he's done it is just amazing to know we can only sign 25 people a year, yet 4 out of the last 7 years we've been at the top. And certainly hope for more, but we're spoiled. We all know that, and it's been a great honor and privilege to be a part of it. We're very blessed.
We're visiting with Tommy Ford, author of many books regarding Alabama football. His latest is Alabama's Crimson Mission. You can follow Tommy on Twitter at Tommy4Tide. That's at Tommy, the numeral 4, Tide. All right, I said this championship from this past season might have been one of the most satisfying in terms of what Alabama bounced back from the previous couple of years and with the target on their back, but certainly one of the most amazing championships in terms of this community and overcoming adversity has to be the championship following the tornado. Mm-hmm. And you've written about that with the University of Alabama from tornado to national championship 14, and also, of course, the Carson Tinker book, which is phenomenal. Again, I'll mention that a season. Remember, Faith in the Midst of the Storm. Talk about those two books, and especially the one with Carson Tinker, to be able to document that season, not just through a player's eyes, but through a player that lost his girlfriend tragically in the tornado and almost died himself. It's an incredible story.
Well, it really is, and just I guess through God's plan, Carson and I were actually introduced by Gary Kramer, the FCA director, when Lifeway Publishing or Broadman Holman Publishing had come to me and saying, asked about a possible book on the tornado and how it related to athletics. And there had been a lot of those stories out there, and I just felt like everybody was sort of tornadoed out and didn't want to hear about it. And then, the president of Lifeway said, well, what about Carson Tinker and his story? And I got to thinking, wow, that may work. So anyway, Gary introduced Carson to me, and Carson said, you're an answer to a prayer. He says, I've been wanting to do my story, but I didn't know how to go about it, didn't know anything about publishing, writing, anything. I said, well, let's work together. So for 2.5 years, Carson and I worked on this book, and over the 11th season was just completing, and we would have written it whether or not we won the 11 national championship. But we worked on it, started in December of 11, and it came out in April of 2014. Of course, included in that was the 11th season, the 12 national championship season, and his whole journey from the time he was injured in the tornado until the time he walked out against Kent State, in 2011, after going through the injuries and rehab that he had gone, and looking up in the stands and just thanking God, for his being there. So it's a special story. Carson's doing great. He's entering his 4th year now with the Jacksonville Jaguars as their long snapper, and it's had a remarkable turnaround since that day.
Yeah, it's just an incredible book. And again, if you haven't read it, folks, make sure you get a season to remember. I mentioned a couple of the collaborations you've had with Pat Williams, a longtime professional sports executive, motivational speaker. I've had the pleasure of interviewing him, and I mean, when you look up his resume, I mean, this was a guy that has accomplished so much in pro sports. How did that come about? How did you come about working with Pat Williams?
Well, Pat had come to Tuscaloosa probably in 2003 or 4 to be the speaker at the Squad Sunday that Calvary Baptist Church puts on. Well, when he was there, he got to meet our friend John Merrill, obviously.
Right.
And so John, they had a good time, and Pat had always been sort of enthralled with Alabama and Coach Bryant. Well, John invited Pat back probably 2007 or 8 for the West Alabama Prayer Breakfast to be the keynote speaker. So he came back for that, and Pat took a tour of the Bryant Museum and told John then, said, I'm starting a series on college coaches and leadership. I want my first one to be Bear Bryant. Well, a couple years later, he called John and said, all right, I'm ready to do the book. I need a writer, and I need somebody who knows Alabama football and knows how to get in touch with the players. And John says, well, Tommy Ford's your guy. And I was honored and humbled by that. And so Pat and I got in touch. We met. I went to Orlando, spent a weekend with him in June of 2010, and we really went from 0 to 100 in about 5 months, and wrote this book. Came out in November 10. We interviewed 222 Alabama players.
Holy cow!
Either players of Coach Bryant at either Alabama, Texas A&M, even Maryland. Interviewed a few of the guys in their 90s, and in Kentucky. Interviewed players. We interviewed coaches who coached with Coach Bryant, coaches who coached against him, and the media who covered him. And all 222 interviews. And Pat had developed a leadership outline of what it takes, 7 traits of a great leader, and we took that outline and we applied all these stories about Coach Bryant. And Pat called them the 7 sides of leadership. The first one being vision, and then communication skills, and people skills, character, confidence, boldness, and finally a serving heart. And we took all those things, and Pat asked most of these guys 4 main questions, and then from that we wrote a 200-page book. So it was fun. It was taxing. It was but a very good story, and I think it's timeless, because somebody could pick this book up 10 years from now, and then all those leadership principles Coach Bryant had would still apply.
Well, Tommy, I've enjoyed the visit. Before we close it out, again, let's tell folks how they can pick up Alabama's Crimson Mission, Coach Saban, and the Tide Silence Critics with 16th National Championship by Tommy Ford, photos by Kent Gidley, forward by Jake Coker. Whitman Books is the publisher. I mean, I guess it's available at all the standard outlets.
Yeah, Tuscaloosa. Barnes & Noble now has it. It's at the Bryant Museum. It's at the University Supply Store in Ferguson Center. And it's also available online,
right.
Amazon, Whitman Publishing, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble. It's on rolltide.com via the Fanatics page. So it's available around town, and we're hoping to get it in the Barnes & Noble in Birmingham, but I haven't heard if they have it yet.
Well, it's terrific. All of your books, again, when Alabama fans are looking for unique gift items, they could just Google Tommy Ford, and there's a list of books right there. Many of them would make great gifts for Bama fans.
Thank you, Gary. It's just been a hobby. It's just sort of what I do at night and on weekends, and it's been fun. I've been blessed to have the opportunity.
Well, thanks for the time. I enjoyed it, Tommy.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate you calling.